There are some moments in the car world that sound completely fake until you actually see them happen. This is one of them. Imagine walking into Monterey Car Week, surrounded by some of the most expensive cars on earth, and suddenly a stranger puts a set of keys in your hand. Not the keys to a normal sports car. Not the keys to a press car that belongs to a manufacturer. The keys to a Koenigsegg Jesko. A machine worth millions of dollars. A car most people will never even see in person, let alone drive. And then the owner looks at Mat Armstrong and basically says, "Go ahead." That is exactly where the story gets crazy. Because Mat had never met this man before. There was no long friendship between them. No years of trust. No business relationship that forced the owner to do it. He simply decided that Mat was the person he trusted behind the wheel. And if you know anything about Mat Armstrong, you know that getting handed the keys to an ordinary car would not be enough to make this story interesting. Within hours, Mat would be driving the Jesko through California, surrounded by a convoy of unbelievable hypercars. He would experience the kind of performance most car enthusiasts can only imagine. Then, just when everything seemed perfect, the Jesko would go into limp mode. A multi-million-dollar hypercar on a mountain road with Mat behind the wheel. And somehow, that still would not be the biggest mechanical problem of the day. Because while everyone was focused on these million-dollar machines, a Ferrari F40 in the convoy started overheating. The cooling fans were not doing what they were supposed to do. The temperature was climbing, and suddenly Mat was no longer just enjoying Monterey Car Week. He was trying to save one of the most famous Ferraris ever built, and his solution was about as far away from a Ferrari dealership as you can get. There were no fancy diagnostic computers, no clean workshop, no perfectly organized toolbox. Instead, Mat ended up using a basic roadside fix involving electrical tape and his own teeth. But even that was not the end of the story. Later, Mat would walk into the Koenigsegg display, start inspecting the engineering behind another car, and find himself standing face-to-face with the man who created the entire company, Christian von Koenigsegg. And that meeting revealed something that may actually be more interesting than the Jesko itself. Because Mat's entire Monterey experience seemed to answer one question. How did a guy who became famous rebuilding damaged cars end up being trusted with machines worth millions? The answer goes back much further than this one trip. Mat did not become someone owners could trust overnight. He built that reputation one broken car at a time. He became known for taking on projects that looked too difficult, opening them up, finding the problems, and actually getting involved instead of standing on the sidelines. That is important when you're dealing with a car like a Koenigsegg. Anyone can be excited by the badge. Anyone can talk about horsepower. Anyone can take a picture beside a hypercar. But when someone owns a car worth millions, they want to know that the person driving it understands what is sitting underneath them. They want someone who respects the machine. And apparently, this Jesko owner believed Mat was exactly that person. In fact, when Mat could hardly believe what was happening and pointed out that they had only just met, the owner's response made the entire situation even more surprising. He basically explained that he felt there was less risk with Mat than with almost anyone else. Think about that for a second. A stranger had just met Mat, yet he trusted him enough to drive a multi-million-dollar Koenigsegg. That single decision tells you more about Mat's reputation than any long introduction ever could. And the craziest part? The owner had no idea how memorable that decision was about to become. The moment Mat climbed into the Jesko, the entire situation probably started to feel real. Until then, it was just a conversation and a set of keys. Now the car was around him. The doors were open. The controls were in front of him. The steering wheel, paddles, screens, and startup system were no longer things he had seen through a camera. They were right there. And this is where Mat's personality makes the scene so much more interesting. He did not simply jump in and start screaming about how expensive the car was. He started looking at it. He noticed the details. He wanted to understand what he was sitting in. That is exactly what you expect from someone who has spent years tearing cars apart and putting them back together. A normal person might look at a $4 million hypercar and see a beautiful object. Mat sees a machine. He wants to know where the systems are, how the parts connect, what makes the car work, and why the engineers made certain choices. But eventually, there was nothing left to inspect. It was time to drive. The Jesco came alive, and suddenly the quiet moment inside the car turned into something much louder. The sound from the engine and exhaust was enough to remind everyone around it that this was not a normal vehicle. Mat eased the car into traffic and began heading toward the mountain roads. And that is when the situation became almost ridiculous. He was not driving some random supercar through California. He was sitting in a Koenigsegg Jesco while traveling with a convoy that included machines like a Hennessy Venom F5, a LaFerrari, multiple Koenigsegg's, and other cars that most people will only ever see behind barriers at motor show. For a few moments, everything seemed perfect. The roads were open. The cars were moving. Mat had one of the rarest machines on the planet underneath him. But then the Jesco decided to remind everyone that even the most advanced hypercars are still machines. Something happened, and the car went into limp mode. Suddenly, the mood changed. Imagine the pressure. You are driving a car worth millions. It is not yours. You have only recently been trusted with it. And now the car is telling you something is wrong. This is the kind of moment where a driver can panic. Mat, however, has spent years dealing with situations that look worse than they actually are. He knows that a warning or strange behavior does not automatically mean the car is finished. Sometimes systems need to reset. Sometimes electronics behave unexpectedly. The first step was to shut the car down completely, lock it, give the systems a moment, and then try again. And somehow, that simple process worked. The Jesco came back to life. The car continued. But that little problem added something the perfect drive never could. Tension. Because now the audience had seen the reality behind the dream. This was not a video game car. It was a real machine, carrying real technology, being pushed through real roads. And while Mat had just survived his first unexpected problem in a multi-million-dollar hypercar, another car in a convoy was about to need him even more. The Ferrari F40 problem started in a completely different way. There was no dramatic warning that instantly made everyone panic. Instead, the car began getting too hot because its cooling fans were not activating correctly. That may sound like a small problem until you remember what car we're talking about. The Ferrari F40 is not something you casually leave on the side of the road while you figure things out. It is one of Ferrari's most famous cars, a machine with a legendary reputation and enormous value. The last thing anyone wants during a mountain drive is to watch the temperature keep climbing. And this is where Mat suddenly switched from hypercar passenger to mechanic. He and Tony started looking into the problem. The goal was simple. Figure out why the fans were not turning on and find a way to keep the engine temperature under control. Eventually, they traced the problem to a connection around the cooling temperature switch. A wire connection was not doing its job properly, which meant the fans were not getting the signal they needed. In a normal workshop, this might have been a relatively straightforward repair. But they were not in a workshop. They were on the side of a California road during one of the biggest car events in the world. So Mat had to improvise. And this is where the story becomes almost perfectly suited to his channel. Surrounded by million-dollar cars, Mat was using simple tools and electrical tape to keep a Ferrari F40 alive. He even used his teeth to help strip the wire. It sounds ridiculous, but that is exactly why people remember moments like this. The repair did not need to be pretty. It needed to work. By bridging the connection and allowing the cooling fans to run continuously, they were able to bring the temperature back under control. Suddenly, the F40 was moving again, and that little roadside repair showed why Mat's reputation is different from that of someone who simply reviews expensive cars. He knows what to do when something goes wrong. He does not need a perfect workshop, a spotless floor, or a giant team of technicians standing behind him. Give him a problem and enough time to think, and he will try to find a solution. That is exactly the kind of skill that makes an owner comfortable handing him the keys to a car worth millions. It also created one of the funniest contrasts of the entire trip. There were multi-million-dollar hypercars everywhere. People had traveled from around the world to see them. Owners had spent huge amounts of money maintaining them. And yet one of the most memorable mechanical moments involved a Ferrari F40, a loose electrical connection, some electrical tape, and Mat Armstrong's teeth. You could have brought the most advanced diagnostic equipment in the world to that road. But sometimes the immediate solution is much simpler. The fans needed to run. The temperature needed to come down, and Matt got the job done. It was not glamorous. It was not polished, but it was real, and that is exactly why it worked so well on camera. The Jesco showed the glamorous side of Matt's new world. The F40 showed that underneath all the hypercars and celebrity meetings, he was still the same hands-on mechanic who was willing to get his hands dirty when something broke. After the F40 was back on the road, the day continued with another reminder of just how unusual Matt's position had become. He was not simply attending Monterey Car Week anymore. He was experiencing it from a completely different level. He had already driven the Jesco, dealt with an unexpected limp mode issue, and helped with an F40 problem. Now he had the chance to experience other machines that most enthusiasts would consider dream cars. The Hennessy Venom F5 was one of them. With enormous power and a design focused almost entirely on speed, the Venom F5 represents the American side of the modern hypercar battle. It is the kind of car that makes even experienced enthusiasts stop and look twice. Then there was a McLaren Senna, another machine built around performance rather than comfort. These cars were not simply expensive versions of ordinary sports cars. Their entire purpose was different. Every design choice was made with speed, downforce, weight, braking, and driver involvement in mind. For Matt, getting to experience them back-to-back was an opportunity that would have seemed almost impossible earlier in his career. But there's another detail that makes his journey so interesting. He did not become successful by pretending to be someone else. His content was built around damaged cars, difficult projects, and the process of fixing things. That background followed him into this new world. Even while surrounded by hypercars, he was still looking at them like a mechanic. He wanted to understand how they worked. That became especially obvious when he reached the Koenigsegg display. Instead of simply taking a quick look at the newest car and moving on, Matt started studying it. He examined the carbon fiber, the lighting system, the connections, the brake cooling, and the way different components were packaged. For another person, those might have been tiny details. For Matt, they were clues. Every unusual part raised another question. Why was it designed that way? How was it connected? How difficult would it be to repair? What kind of thinking went into making it? And then something happened that changed the entire atmosphere. Someone from a Koenigsegg team noticed Matt's interest and began explaining the car to him. That may not sound like a huge moment, but for someone who makes his living understanding how cars are built, it is a dream situation. Instead of being told to stay behind a line, Matt was having a genuine conversation about the engineering. He could ask questions. He could examine details. He could discuss the choices that went into the design. It showed a different side of the automotive world. Koenigsegg is known for making cars that are extremely complicated, but the people behind them were willing to talk about that complexity with someone who genuinely wanted to understand it. And then, just when the experience already seemed impossible to top, Matt turned around and found himself standing face-to-face with Christian von Koenigsegg. This was not just another celebrity encounter. Christian is the founder of the company. He is the person whose ideas helped create the brand that now produces some of the world's most advanced hypercars. And the most interesting part was that Christian already knew who Matt was. Matt did not have to spend 10 minutes explaining his channel or convincing Christian that he belonged there. They could simply start talking about cars. For Matt, that must have been a strange moment. Not long ago, his biggest challenge was rebuilding damaged cars. Now, the founder of Koenigsegg was standing in front of him discussing the very machines Matt had been studying. The conversation between Matt and Christian von Koenigsegg was important because it gave the entire trip a human side. Christian could have simply smiled, taken a photograph, and moved on. Instead, the two talked about the Jesco and Matt's experience driving it. Matt explained that it was his first time driving a Koenigsegg, and his reaction made it clear that the car had left a serious impression on him. Christian then explained details about the car, including how different specifications and track-focused options could change the character of the machine. For someone like Matt, this was exactly the kind of conversation he would want. He was not just interested in how fast the car could go. He wanted to understand what made it different, what changed between versions, what happened when the car was prepared for more aggressive driving. How did Koenigsegg approach those engineering decisions? These are the questions that make his content different from a simple luxury car video. And there was another layer underneath the conversation. Matt had spent a lot of time dealing with manufacturers and parts issues during his previous projects, especially when working on cars that were never designed to be repaired in the way he was repairing them. His experience with Koenigsegg felt completely different. There was no obvious tension. No need to argue about a damaged car. No complicated battle over parts. Instead, there was a simple conversation between people who loved engineering. Matt's reaction afterwards seemed to make the contrast clear without needing a long explanation. He knew the experience was unusual. He also knew how different it felt from some of his previous interactions with major brands. That is where the story becomes bigger than just a Koenigsegg video. Matt was beginning to enter a part of the automotive world that once seemed completely separate from his own. He was meeting manufacturers. He was driving hypercars. He was being trusted by owners. And he was speaking directly with people who design and build the machines he had spent years studying. But perhaps the most important part was that Matt did not lose the quality that got him there. He was still curious. He was still asking questions. He was still interested in the small details. And when a car had a problem, he was still willing to grab electrical tape and start working. That combination may be the real reason the Jesco owner trusted him. A person who sees a multi-million-dollar car as something to understand, rather than something to show off, is probably exactly the kind of person an owner wants behind the wheel. The story therefore becomes much more powerful when you stop looking at the Jesco as the main prize and start looking at it as a symbol. Those keys represented a level of trust Matt had earned through years of work. They represented the distance between where he started and where he was standing now. They represented the fact that someone in the world of hypercars believed he could handle one of its most valuable machines responsibly. And they also showed something about how online automotive creators have changed the industry. People like Matt are no longer simply viewers of the car world. They have become part of it. Manufacturers know who they are. Owners know who they are. Engineers know who they are. And when the right creator earns enough trust, doors that once seemed completely closed can suddenly open. But if you think the Jesco was simply a lucky opportunity, there is another way to look at it. Matt's entire career had been preparing him for a moment like this. Every difficult repair, every damaged car, every broken component, and every problem he had solved had built the same skill: understanding machines under pressure. That is why the Ferrari F40 incident fits so perfectly into the story. Anyone can drive a perfect car on a perfect road. The real test comes when something goes wrong. Matt had already shown that he could stay calm when the Jesco entered limp mode. Then he showed that he could diagnose a cooling problem on an F40 with limited tools. Those moments made the glamour of the trip feel earned. He was not simply being rewarded with expensive cars. He was proving why he belonged around them. There's also something powerful about the fact that the Jesco owner trusted Matt before seeing him work. The owner had apparently seen enough of Matt's reputation to believe that he would be careful. That says something about the influence of his videos. Viewers have watched Matt make mistakes, solve problems, and deal with difficult situations for years. They know that when something breaks, his first instinct is usually to investigate rather than panic. That kind of reputation is valuable. It cannot be bought with 1 million views or created with a clever thumbnail. It comes from consistency. And that may be the biggest lesson hidden inside this entire story. The $4 million Koenigsegg was impressive, but the trust behind the keys was even more impressive. A car could be replaced. A relationship built on trust is harder to replace. For the owner, handing Matt the keys was a risk. For Matt, accepting them was a responsibility. He had to know that every mile was being watched by people who understood exactly how special the car was. Yet he still drove it. He enjoyed it. He experienced the machine in the way it was meant to be experienced. That is what made the moment so satisfying. It was not a museum piece sitting behind glass. It was a working hypercar on a mountain road. And Matt was in the driver's seat. The journey also showed how quickly life can change when someone builds a career around a genuine skill. Years earlier, Matt was not walking around Monterey Car Week as one of the most recognizable people in the automotive creator world. He was simply a guy working on cars and filming what happened. The audience grew because the problems were real and the solutions were interesting. Then the projects became bigger. The cars became more expensive. The challenges became more complicated. And eventually, Matt found himself surrounded by machines that once would have been completely out of reach. That does not mean the journey is finished. If anything, the Jesco experience suggests that the opportunities are becoming bigger. The same curiosity that made Matt successful with damaged cars is now taking him into the world of hypercar engineering. And that is why this story feels like more than a single day at Monterey Car Week. It feels like a turning point. The man who once had to find ways to repair cars that other people had given up on was now being trusted with cars that most people would be terrified to touch. The difference is not simply money. It is reputation.